On a rain-soaked October night, 10-year-old Malik Carter walked up to a police car and begged to be arrested, claiming he'd done something terrible. But when Officer Daniel Reeves reluctantly took him to the station and reached for the sleek metallic wristband on the trembling boy's arm, the scanner triggered a federal alert that froze everyone in the room, displaying 3 chilling words in blood-red letters. Classified identifier found, and as men in black suits arrived, demanding custody, as power surged through the building, shorting out every electronic device, and as Malik whispered that dangerous people were coming for him, Monroe and Reeves realized they hadn't just picked up a scared runaway child. They'd stumbled into a government conspiracy so deep that keeping this boy alive might cost them everything they'd ever believed in, because sometimes the most innocent among us carry the darkest secrets. And tonight, that secret was about to shatter everything. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The rain came down in sheets that late October evening, turning the quiet streets of Riverside into a blur of reflections and shadows. Officer Daniel Reeves sat behind the wheel of his patrol car, watching droplets race down the windshield, while his partner, Officer Tasha Monroe, sipped lukewarm coffee from a thermos. They'd been patrolling this district for 3 hours without incident, which was exactly how Reeves preferred it. "Think this storm's going to last all night?" Monroe asked, her voice cutting through the rhythmic pounding of rain on metal. Reeves shrugged, his eyes scanning the empty sidewalks. "Weather said it would. Means fewer idiots out causing trouble." Monroe smiled slightly. She'd been partnered with Reeves for 8 months now, long enough to know his gruff exterior masked something more complicated. He was known around the precinct as fair but cold, the kind of cop who followed procedure to the letter. But she'd seen moments of warmth break through, usually when he thought no one was watching. Thunder rumbled overhead, and Monroe was about to suggest they grab something to eat when Reeves suddenly sat up straighter. "You see that?" he muttered. Monroe leaned forward, squinting through the rain-streaked window. A small figure was moving toward them on the sidewalk, stumbling slightly against the wind. As it got closer, Monroe's chest tightened. It was a child, completely drenched, wearing what looked like a thin jacket and jeans. "What the hell is a kid doing out here?" Reeves said, already reaching for the door handle. Before he could open it, the child reached their car and knocked on Monroe's window with small, shaking fists. She rolled it down immediately, cold rain spraying into the vehicle. "Hey, sweetie, are you okay?" Monroe asked, her voice gentle but urgent. The boy looked up at her with wide, terrified eyes. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, his dark skin glistening with rainwater, his clothes plastered to his thin frame. But what struck Monroe most was the strange calmness in his expression, like he'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. "Please," the boy said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Please arrest me." Reeves and Monroe exchanged confused glances. Reeves leaned across the center console, frowning. "Son, what are you talking about? Are you lost? Where are your parents?" The boy's jaw trembled, but his voice remained steady. "I did something bad, something really bad. You have to lock me up, please." Monroe opened her door and stepped out into the rain, crouching down to the boy's level. Water soaked through her uniform within seconds, but she didn't care. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his young face, the dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Malik," he whispered. "Malik Carter." "Okay, Malik. I'm Officer Monroe, and this is Officer Reeves. Can you tell us what happened? Why do you think you need to be arrested?" Malik's eyes darted past her shoulder toward the dark alley across the street. It was a quick movement, almost imperceptible. But Monroe caught it. Her training kicked in instantly. She subtly shifted her body to shield the boy while her hand moved toward her flashlight. Malik, is someone following you? She asked quietly. The boy's breathing quickened. You don't understand. They'll come if you don't. They'll find me and they'll... Please, just put me in handcuffs. Take me to jail. Anywhere with locks. Reeves got out of the car, his frustration evident in the way he slammed the door. He walked around to where Monroe crouched with the boy, rain streaming down his face. Kid, we can't just arrest you. That's not how this works. You need to tell us what's going on. But Malik wasn't listening. He grabbed onto Reeves's sleeve with both hands, his small fingers digging into the wet fabric with surprising strength. Please, he begged, and for the first time, real terror cracked through his composed exterior. You have to. They told me if I ever ran, they'd come, and they will. They always do. Monroe shone her flashlight toward the alley Malik had glanced at earlier. The beam cut through the rain, illuminating overflowing dumpsters, scattered trash, and empty darkness. Nothing moved. No one was there. But something about the way Malik had looked at that spot made her skin prickle. Daniel, she said quietly, using his first name, which she rarely did on duty. We need to take him in. Reeves looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Are you serious? Take him in for what? Being out past curfew? For his safety, Monroe replied firmly. She turned back to Malik. Honey, we're going to bring you to the station where it's warm and dry. We'll get you some food, maybe some clean clothes, and then we'll figure out what's going on. Does that sound okay? Relief flooded Malik's face so completely that it almost broke Monroe's heart. You'll lock the doors? He asked desperately. You promise? I promise, Monroe said softly. Reeves muttered something under his breath about paperwork and liability. But he opened the back door of the patrol car. Malik climbed in without hesitation, and the moment the door closed behind him, his entire body seemed to relax. He leaned back against the seat, eyes closed, water dripping from his hair onto the vinyl. Monroe got back in the passenger seat, and Reeves started the engine. As they pulled away from the curb, Monroe glanced back at Malik through the protective barrier. You're safe now, she said. Malik's eyes opened slowly. Not yet, he whispered, but maybe soon. The drive to the precinct took 12 minutes. Malik didn't say another word, just stared out the window at the rain-soaked streets. Reeves kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. When they pulled into the station's underground parking garage, Malik exhaled a long, shuddering breath. Monroe helped him out of the car, noting how his legs seemed unsteady, like he'd been running for hours before finding them. Inside, the precinct buzzed with its usual late-shift energy. Officers filed reports, phones rang, someone argued loudly in one of the interrogation rooms. But when Monroe walked in with a soaking wet 10-year-old boy who'd asked to be arrested, the noise died down considerably. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Officer Bradley, who'd been typing at his desk, actually stood up to get a better look. Monroe, he called out. What have you got there? Not sure yet, Monroe replied, keeping her hand on Malik's shoulder. Kid flagged us down asking to be arrested. Sergeant Miller's office door opened, and the man himself stepped out, a mug of coffee in one hand. He was 52, built like a retired linebacker, with gray hair buzzed military short and a face that rarely showed emotion. He took one look at Malik and set his mug down with a heavy thud. Conference room. Now, Miller said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Reeves and Monroe guided Malik through the bullpen toward the small conference room near Miller's office. Curious eyes followed them the entire way. Inside, Miller closed the door and pulled the blinds, shutting out the prying stares. Sit, he told Malik, pointing to a chair. Malik sat immediately, his hands folded in his lap. Even soaked and exhausted, he maintained that strange composure like a soldier awaiting orders. Miller turned to his officers. "Explain." Reeves did, keeping it brief and factual. As he spoke, Miller's frown deepened. When Reeves finished, Miller pulled up a chair and sat across from Malik. "Son, I'm Sergeant Miller. These officers brought you here because you asked, but before we can help you, I need you to tell me the truth. Did someone hurt you?" Malik shook his head. "Are you running away from home?" Another head shake. "Then why are you asking to be arrested?" Malik's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because jail has bars and locks, and they can't get through those." "Who can't?" Monroe asked gently. But Malik just looked down at his lap, his jaw set in stubborn silence. Miller sighed and stood up. "All right. We'll do this by the book. Standard intake procedure. Monroe, process him. Reeves, contact Child Protective Services. We'll sort this out in the morning." As Miller moved toward the door, Reeves approached Malik. "Okay, kid. I need to check you for any weapons or anything dangerous. It's just procedure. And I'll need to remove any jewelry or accessories you're wearing." Malik stiffened. "No. It's just temporary," Reeves assured him. "You'll get everything back." "No," Malik repeated, pulling his right arm protectively against his chest. That's when Monroe noticed it. On Malik's wrist was a sleek metallic band, about an inch wide, with faint engravings catching the fluorescent light. It looked expensive, high-tech, nothing like the cheap friendship bracelets or rubber bands kids usually wore. "It's okay," Monroe said softly. "We just need to scan it for the inventory. You'll get it right back." Malik's eyes filled with tears, but he slowly extended his arm. Reeves pulled out the standard intake scanner, a device they used to catalog personal belongings. He held it over the wristband and pressed the button. The scanner beeped once. Then it beeped again. Faster. Then it started emitting a high-pitched whine. "What the?" Reeves muttered, shaking the device. The computer monitor on the wall, which had been displaying the standard intake form, suddenly flickered. Lines of code scrolled across the screen at impossible speed. Then the screen went black except for 3 words in bright red letters. Classified identifier found. Everyone in the room froze. Monroe felt her heartbeat accelerate as more text appeared. "Do not detain. Federal alert issued. Subject protected under defense protocol. 8. The scanner in Reeves' hand sparked once and went dead. The entire room fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of rain against windows. Miller's face had gone pale. He rushed to the computer, his fingers flying over the keyboard, but the screen wouldn't respond to any commands. Finally, one last line of text appeared before the monitor shut down completely. "Accessing this identifier triggers automatic federal notification. Stand by for contact." "Everyone out," Miller said, his voice tight. "Right now." "Sir, what's going on?" Monroe asked. "Out," Miller barked. "And both of you, not a word about this to anyone. File nothing, or log nothing. Am I clear?" Reeves and Monroe nodded, but Monroe's mind was racing. She'd seen classified flags before, usually on witnesses in federal cases or people in witness protection. But never with this level of security. Never with a warning, like defense protocol. As Miller ushered them toward the door, Monroe glanced back at Malik. The boy sat perfectly still in his chair, staring at his wristband. His lips moved, forming words too quiet to hear, but Monroe caught fragments. "Mom said they'd come, if I ever told. They always find me." Outside the conference room, Reeves grabbed Monroe's arm. "What the hell just happened?" "I don't know," Monroe admitted. "But that kid isn't just scared, Daniel. He's terrified of something specific. Something big." Through the conference room window, they watched Miller make a phone call, his expression growing more tense with each passing second. Whatever was happening, they'd just stepped into something far beyond a routine call about a lost child. The storm outside intensified, thunder shaking the building's old bones. And in that conference room, Malik Carter sat alone, waiting for the people he knew would come, just like they always did. The rain hadn't stopped, and neither had Monroe's questions. She sat across from Malik in one of the precinct's smaller holding rooms, this one usually reserved for juveniles waiting for their parents. But Malik had no parents coming for him, at least none that he'd admit to having. "Malik, I need you to help me understand," Monroe said, keeping her voice gentle. "Where do you live? Where's your home?" The moment the word home left her lips, Malik's entire body tensed. His breathing quickened, his hands gripped the edge of the table, and his eyes darted toward the door like he was calculating an escape route. "It's okay," Monroe said quickly, holding up her hands. "You don't have to tell me right now. Just take a breath." Malik forced himself to breathe slowly, but the panic didn't completely leave his face. Monroe had seen trauma responses before, plenty of them. But this felt different. This felt like trained behavior, like someone had conditioned this child to react with terror to certain words, certain questions. Outside in the hallway, Reeves paced back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear as he waited on hold with Child Protective Services. The hold music was driving him insane, some tinny instrumental version of a pop song he couldn't quite place. "Come on," he muttered, checking his watch. They'd been waiting 45 minutes. Finally, a voice came on the line. "CPS intake, this is Denise." "Yeah, this is Officer Reeves with Riverside PD. I've got a juvenile here, approximately 10 years old, found wandering in a storm. Says his name is Malik Carter. No injuries, but he's clearly in distress. Refuses to provide information about his guardians." "Okay, let me pull up our database," Denise said. Reeves could hear typing in the background. "Carter, you said? Carter? "Correct." More typing, then a long pause. "That's strange," Denise said slowly. "I'm not finding any Malik Carter in our system. No active cases, no previous reports. Are you sure that's his real name?" Reeves frowned. "That's what he told us. Well, without more information, I can't dispatch a social worker until morning. Is the child safe where he is?" "Yeah, he's safe. We'll keep him overnight." As Reeves ended the call, he had a bad feeling settling in his gut. A 10-year-old boy with no record in the CPS system? That was unusual but not impossible. Kids fell through cracks all the time, but combined with that wristband and the federal alert, it felt like pieces of a puzzle he didn't want to solve. He was heading back toward the holding room when the front entrance doors opened. Two men in dark suits walked in, their shoes clicking against the linoleum with military precision. They were both white, both clean-cut, both wearing expressions that suggested they weren't here for a friendly chat. The taller one approached the front desk where Officer Daniels sat. "We're here for the Carter boy." Daniels looked up, confused. "I'm sorry, who are you?" The man pulled out a badge holder, flipping it open just long enough for Daniels to see some kind of federal identification before snapping it shut again. "Federal authority. We're here to take custody of the child brought in approximately 90 minutes ago." Reeves stepped forward. "Hold on. Federal authority? What agency?" The shorter man turned to him, his expression flat. "That's classified. Where's the child?" "I need to see that identification again," Reeves said firmly, "and I need proper documentation before we release anyone into your custody." The tall man's jaw tightened. "You don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me." "We can't. It's classified." "Then you're not taking the kid." The tension in the room ratcheted up immediately. Other officers had started paying attention, hands drifting closer to their duty belts. The two federal men exchanged a look, and the shorter one pulled out his phone. "One moment," he said coldly, stepping aside to make a call. Reeves walked quickly back to the holding room where Monroe still sat with Malik. He knocked once and opened the door. "We've got a problem," he said quietly. Monroe stood immediately. "What kind of problem?" "Two feds just showed up demanding custody of the kid. No paperwork, barely showed credentials. Something's really wrong here." At the mention of federal agents, Malik went rigid. His eyes widened, and he grabbed Monroe's hand with surprising strength. "Don't let them take me," he whispered urgently. "Please. They're the ones who took my mom." Monroe crouched down beside him. "What do you mean they took your mom? Malik, where is your mother?" "I don't know," Malik said, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. "She's been gone for 3 months. They came to our house one night, these men in suits just like that, and they took her away. She told me to run, to hide, to never let them find me. But they did. They always do." Reeves felt ice spread through his veins. "Malik, who are these men? What do they want?" "They want what Mom tried, to hide," Malik said, his voice breaking. "They want what's inside me." Before either officer could ask what that meant, raised voices erupted in the hallway. Miller's voice carried clearly. "I don't care who the hell you think you are. You're not taking that child without proper authorization from my superiors." The tall federal agent's response was calm, but edged with steel. "Sergeant, you don't need paperwork under Protocol 8. That child is a federal asset, and every second he remains in civilian custody is a violation of national security." Monroe made a split-second decision. She locked the holding room door from the inside. "What are you doing?" Reeves asked. "Buying time," Monroe said. She turned to Malik. "Is there anything else you can tell us? Anything that might help us understand what's happening?" Malik reached into his jacket pocket with trembling hands and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It was water-stained and worn, like he'd been carrying it for a long time. He handed it to Monroe. She unfolded it carefully. It was a photograph, slightly blurred but clear enough. It showed Malik, maybe a year younger, standing beside a woman in a white lab coat. She was beautiful, with the same warm brown eyes as Malik, her arm wrapped protectively around his shoulders. They were standing in what looked like a research facility, complicated equipment visible in the background. Monroe flipped the photo over. On the back, written in hasty handwriting, were a series of numbers. 37.2, 192-888, and beneath that letters, VXPHX. "Who is this?" Monroe asked, though she already had a sinking feeling she knew. "My mom," Malik whispered. "Dr. Elise Carter. She's a scientist. Was a scientist. They said she died in a fire, but that's a lie. I know she's alive because sometimes—" He stopped, looking afraid to continue. "Sometimes what?" Reeves prompted gently. "Sometimes I can still hear her, in my head. Like she's calling to me." Outside, someone was working on the door lock. Monroe quickly pulled out her phone and snapped photos of both sides of the photograph, then handed it back to Malik. "Keep that safe," she said. The door burst open. Miller stood there, his face flushed with anger, and something else. Something that looked a lot like fear. "Monroe, Reeves, my office. Now." "Sergeant, we need to—" Monroe started. That wasn't a request. Miller cut her off. As they filed out, Monroe looked back at Malik. One of the federal agents had entered the room and was approaching the boy. Malik pressed himself against the wall, his eyes locked on Monroe's, pleading without words. In Miller's office, the sergeant closed the door and rounded on them. "Do either of you understand what you've done?" he hissed. "That wristband triggered an alert that went straight to Washington. I just got off the phone with someone who made it very clear that our little precinct is now under federal scrutiny." "Who was it?" Reeves asked. "I don't know. The call was encrypted, but they ordered me to hand over the boy immediately and destroy all footage from tonight, every second of it." "You can't be serious," Monroe said. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Miller's hands were shaking slightly as he poured himself a glass of water. "This is above our pay grade, way above. That kid is terrified," Reeves said. "He says those men took his mother 3 months ago. We can't just hand him over." "His mother is dead," Miller said flatly. "I looked her up while you two were playing protector. Dr. Elise Carter, biomedical researcher, died in a laboratory fire 4 months ago. It was all over the news." Monroe felt her pulse quicken. 4 months ago, Malik said 3. "The kid's traumatized and confused," Miller said dismissively. "His mother died. He probably ran away from foster care or wherever they placed him, and now he's scared and making up stories." "Then why the federal alert?" Reeves pressed. "Why Protocol 8? Why are suits showing up within 2 hours demanding custody?" Miller had no answer for that. He just stood there, looking older than his 52 years, caught between duty and orders he didn't understand. A knock at the door made them all turn. One of the federal agents opened it without waiting for permission. "Sergeant, we're taking the boy now." "Like hell you are," Reeves said, moving toward the door. The agent's hand moved to his hip, where a gun was holstered beneath his suit jacket. "Officer, don't make this harder than it needs to be." What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. The lights in the precinct flickered once, twice, then surged with blinding brightness. Computer monitors crackled with static. Someone's phone exploded with a sharp pop, sparks flying from its battery, and through it all, a child's scream pierced the air. "Stop!" The word came from Malik, and with it, every electronic device in the building seemed to go haywire. Lights strobed like a nightclub, computers flashed error messages in rapid succession, and the security system began blaring its alarm. Then for exactly 5 seconds, everything went completely dark and silent. When the emergency lights kicked in, bathing everything in eerie red, everyone in Miller's office stood frozen. The federal agent's hand was still on his holster, but he hadn't drawn his weapon. His face had gone pale. Through the doorway, they could see the second agent backing away from the holding room where Malik was. The boy stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving, his wristband glowing with a faint blue light. "We need backup," the agent near the holding room said into his radio, his voice shaky. "Subject is exhibiting active response. I repeat, active response." "Get out," Miller said quietly to the agents. "Both of you, out of my precinct." "Sergeant, you don't understand what—" "Get out." Maybe it was the power surge, or maybe it was the look on Miller's face, but the 2 agents retreated. They backed toward the exit, never taking their eyes off the hallway where Malik stood, and then they were gone. The precinct gradually returned to normal. Lights stopped flickering. Computers rebooted, but nobody moved, still processing what they'd just witnessed. Monroe was the first to break the spell. She walked slowly toward Malik, her hands raised in a calming gesture. "It's okay," she said softly. "They're gone. You're safe." Malik collapsed to his knees, exhausted. The glow from his wristband faded until it looked like nothing more than a piece of jewelry again. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to. I just got so scared, and it just happens." Monroe knelt beside him, and Malik fell against her, his small body shaking with sobs he'd been holding back all night. She wrapped her arms around him, making a decision that would change everything. "Daniel," she said quietly, "we need to get him out of here." Reeves looked at Miller, who stood in his office doorway looking shell-shocked. The sergeant caught Reeves's eye, and after a long moment gave the smallest nod before turning away. That night, as the storm finally began to clear, Monroe led Malik out through the back entrance of the precinct. Her personal car was parked in the lot beyond the security camera's range. Reeves followed in his own vehicle, torn between loyalty to the badge he'd worn for 16 years and the instinct that told him protecting this child was the right thing to do. As they pulled onto the rain-slick highway, Malik stared out the window at the passing streetlights. His voice was barely audible over the engine. "They'll track us. Mom said they always track us through the air." Monroe glanced at him in the rearview mirror, her hands tight on the steering wheel. "Then we'll just have to stay ahead of them." Behind them, inside the precinct, Miller stood at his office window, watching the taillights disappear into the night. His phone rang. He didn't answer it. He already knew what they would say, and he'd already made his choice. Some things were more important than orders. The highway stretched endlessly before them, slick with rain that had finally softened to a drizzle. Monroe kept her eyes on the road, checking her mirrors every few seconds. Beside her, Malik had finally fallen asleep, his head resting against the window, his breathing soft and even. In the seat behind them, visible through her rearview mirror, Reeves followed in his own car, maintaining a careful distance. They'd been driving for nearly 2 hours, heading west away from the city. Monroe had turned off her phone after the first 30 minutes, knowing it could be traced. Reeves had done the same. They were operating on instinct now, no plan beyond putting distance between Malik and whoever wanted him. As the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, Monroe spotted a worn sign advertising a motel 5 miles ahead. The Riverside Inn, vacancy available. It looked perfect. The kind of place that didn't ask questions and probably had spotty surveillance at best. She signaled and took the exit. Reeves followed. The motel was exactly what she'd expected. A single-story building with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign. Only 3 other cars sat in the parking lot. The night clerk, an elderly man reading a paperback behind bulletproof glass, barely looked up as Monroe paid cash for 2 rooms. "No ID required?" she asked. "Not if you're paying up front," the clerk said, sliding 2 keys through the gap in the glass. Monroe carried Malik into room 12. He stirred slightly as she laid him on the bed, but didn't wake. She pulled the thin blanket over him and sat in the chair by the window, watching the parking lot. 5 minutes later, Reeves knocked softly on the door. She let him in, and he immediately pulled the curtains closed. "We need to talk about what we're doing," he said quietly. "We're keeping him safe." "Monroe, we just violated about a dozen regulations. We fled with a minor in protective custody. We ignored a federal order. Miller could report us and we'd be—" "Miller won't report us," Monroe interrupted. "Did you see his face? He knows something's wrong with this whole situation." Reeves rubbed his temples. "Even if you're right, what's the plan? We can't run forever." "I don't know yet," Monroe admitted. "But that kid is terrified of those men. And whatever happened at the precinct, that power surge or whatever it was, those agents were scared of him too." They both looked at Malik, sleeping peacefully for the first time since they'd found him. In sleep, he looked even younger than his 10 years, vulnerable and small. As morning light crept through the gaps in the curtains, Malik woke. His eyes snapped open with the alertness of someone used to danger, scanning the room until he found Monroe. "Where are we?" "Somewhere safe," Monroe said. "Are you hungry?" Malik nodded, and Monroe went to the vending machines outside, returning with chips, crackers, and a candy bar. It wasn't much, but Malik ate like he hadn't seen food in days. While he ate, Monroe noticed him glancing repeatedly at a pad of paper and pen the motel provided on the nightstand. She slid them toward him. "You want to draw something?" Malik took the pen hesitantly and began sketching on the paper. His hand moved with surprising precision, creating symbols and patterns that looked almost mathematical. Monroe watched, fascinated as the designs took shape. Interlocking circles, geometric patterns, and what looked like circuit diagrams. "What is that?" she asked gently. Malik held up the paper. The symbols were identical to the engravings on his wristband. "It's the code," he said simply. Mom used to draw it for me. She said if I ever forgot who I was, I should remember the pattern. Before Monroe could ask more, Reeves burst through the door, his face tense. "We've got company." 3 black SUVs just pulled into a gas station across the street. I saw at least 2 men with federal badges. "How did they find us so fast?" Monroe demanded. Malik looked down at his wristband. "They're tracking this. They always are. Mom said it sends a signal they can follow." "Then we need to go," Reeves said, already moving toward the door. They were halfway to Monroe's car when the SUVs pulled into the motel parking lot, tires screeching. Men in tactical gear poured out, weapons drawn but not raised. They moved with military precision, forming a perimeter. "Get in," Monroe shouted, practically throwing Malik into the back seat. She floored the accelerator, her car fishtailing as it shot out of the parking lot. Behind them, Reeves did the same, deliberately positioning his vehicle between Monroe's car and the pursuing SUVs. "Where do we go?" Monroe shouted. "Away from roads." Reeves's voice crackled through her radio. "Head for the woods, the old logging trail about 2 miles north." Monroe yanked the wheel, her car bouncing violently as she left the paved road for a dirt path barely visible through overgrown brush. Behind them, the SUVs followed, but their larger size made them slower on the narrow trail. Then Malik pointed at the sky. "Look!" 3 drones appeared overhead, small and agile, tracking their movements with camera lenses that glinted in the morning sun. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," Monroe muttered. Reeves's voice came through the radio again. "Monroe, keep going. I've got this." "Daniel, don't." But he'd already stopped his car, gotten out, and pulled his service weapon. He took careful aim at the nearest drone and fired 3 shots. The second shot connected, and the drone spiraled down, crashing into the trees. The other 2 drones adjusted their flight patterns, moving higher and faster, but Reeves had bought them precious seconds. Monroe pushed her car harder, branches scraping against metal as the forest grew denser. Finally, she found a small clearing hidden by a canopy of trees. She killed the engine, and they sat in silence, listening. The sound of the SUVs faded, moving past them on the main trail. Reeves caught up minutes later, breathing hard. "Those aren't regular police drones. That was military-grade equipment." "What kind of people are we running from?" Monroe asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Malik's voice was small from the back seat. "The kind that don't stop. Ever." They abandoned the cars and moved deeper into the woods on foot. Malik struggled to keep up, his thin legs not made for hiking, so Reeves lifted him onto his back. As they walked, something shifted between the 2 men and the boy. Monroe saw it in the way Reeves adjusted Malik's weight, making sure he was comfortable. She saw it in the way Malik rested his cheek against Reeves's shoulder, trusting him completely. "You remind me of someone," Reeves said quietly. "Who?" Malik asked. "My son. He's about your age. I don't get to see him much anymore. His mom and we didn't work out." "I'm sorry," Malik said. "Yeah, me too." They reached an abandoned hunting cabin as afternoon shadows lengthened. It was small, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was shelter. Monroe checked inside first, making sure it was empty, then waved them in, while Reeves started a small fire in the old stone fireplace. Monroe pulled out the photograph Malik had shown her earlier. She studied the numbers on the back. 37.2-192-88. "Malik, what do these numbers mean?" The boy came to sit beside her. "Mom said they were important. She made me memorize them. She said if anything happened to her, I should tell someone good about the numbers and the letters." "VXPHX," Monroe read. "Does that mean anything to you?" Malik nodded slowly. "Mom worked on something called Project Phoenix. She said it was supposed to help people learn better, make their brains work faster. But then she found out they were using it for something bad." "What kind of bad?" Reeves asked, joining them. She said. Malik struggled to find the words. She said they wanted to change how people think. Make them not feel things anymore. She tried to stop them, but that's when the men came. Monroe felt cold despite the fire's warmth. Malik, when did your mother tell you all this? The night they took her. She woke me up and said we had to run, but they were already there, surrounding our house. She gave me this wristband and told me to never take it off. She said it would keep me safe, that it had something inside that only I could unlock. He touched the wristband, and Monroe noticed for the first time how seamlessly it fit his wrist, like it had been custom-made. Not just jewelry, but technology disguised as jewelry. My brain is the code, Malik said quietly, repeating something his mother must have told him. That's what she said. The wristband has information, but it only works with me. With my neural patterns, she called it. Reeves and Monroe exchanged glances. This was bigger than they'd imagined. This wasn't just about a scared kid or even a missing mother. This was about something that people were willing to kill for. There's something else, Malik said hesitantly. He reached into his shoe and pulled out a small flash drive, no bigger than his thumb. Mom hid this in my room. She said if I ever got away, I should find someone who could read it. Monroe took the drive carefully, like it might explode. Do you know what's on it? Proof, Malik said. Proof of what they did. Night fell, and they took turns keeping watch. When it was Monroe's turn, she sat by the window, the flash drive burning a hole in her pocket. She needed a computer, needed to see what was on it. But more than that, she needed to understand why a 10-year-old boy carried the weight of such dangerous knowledge. Behind her, Reeves and Malik slept. Reeves had given Malik his jacket as a blanket, and the boy clutched it like a lifeline. Watching them, Monroe felt something harden in her chest. Whatever it took, she would protect this child. Not because it was her duty, but because it was right. As dawn approached, Malik woke screaming. Reeves was beside him instantly, and Monroe rushed over from her post. It's okay, you're safe, Reeves said, holding the boy's shoulders gently. But Malik wasn't listening. His eyes were unfocused, like he was seeing something they couldn't. Mom, he whispered. She's calling me. She's still alive. I can hear her. Malik. That might just be a dream, Monroe said softly. No, Malik insisted. She taught me. The frequency, she called it. She said even if they took her, she'd find a way to reach me, and I can feel it. She's somewhere close. Somewhere. He pointed northeast. That way. Monroe wanted to dismiss it as trauma, as a child's desperate hope. But she'd seen too much in the past 24 hours to dismiss anything. She pulled out the photograph again, looking at the numbers. Then it clicked. Those aren't random numbers, that's an IP address. 37.21192. Dent 88. Reeves looked over her shoulder. An IP address to what? A location, Monroe said, her pulse quickening. A server, or a facility, or somewhere your mother might be. Hope flooded Malik's face. Can we find it? Monroe knew they should run further, hide better, wait for this to blow over. But she also knew that wouldn't happen. These people, whoever they were, wouldn't stop. The only way forward was through. Yeah, she said. We can find it. The IP address led them to coordinates in a densely wooded area 40 miles from their current location. They moved carefully, staying off main roads, Malik wrapped in Monroe's spare jacket with the hood pulled up to hide his face. By late afternoon, they reached the location, a forgotten service road leading deep into state forest land. At the end of the road stood a chain-link fence topped with rusted barbed wire. Beyond it, barely visible through the trees, was a building. This is it, Malik whispered, his hand unconsciously moving to his wristband. I remember this place. The facility was larger than Monroe had expected. a two-story concrete structure that looked like it had been abandoned for years. Windows were dark, paint peeled from walls, and vegetation had begun reclaiming the parking lot. But the fence was too well maintained for a truly abandoned site. "Security cameras are offline," Reeves observed, pointing to the dark lenses mounted on poles. "Or at least they look offline." They found a section of fence where the chain link had pulled away from a post, creating a gap just large enough to squeeze through. Malik went first, moving with a familiarity that confirmed he'd been here before. The front entrance was locked, but a side door hung slightly ajar, its lock mechanism broken. Inside, the smell of dust and decay filled the air. Emergency exit signs provided the only light, their batteries somehow still functioning after what must have been years. "Stay close," Monroe whispered, her hand on her weapon. They moved through hallways lined with empty offices and abandoned equipment. Papers littered the floor, many too faded to read, but Monroe caught glimpses of official seals and classified stamps. On one wall, a faded logo remained visible: U.S. Defense Cognitive Research Division. This was a government facility, Reeves said quietly. Malik led them deeper into the building with unsettling certainty. He stopped at a door marked Archives and pointed. "The computers are in there. Mom used to let me play games while she worked." Inside the archives, rows of filing cabinets lined the walls. Monroe began searching through them while Reeves kept watch. Most files had been removed, but she found a few folders that had fallen behind cabinets. One contained personnel files. One name jumped out: Dr. Elise Carter, lead researcher, Project Phoenix. But it was the audio equipment they found that proved most valuable. Old recording devices, somehow still containing data. Monroe plugged in headphones and listened. Elise Carter's voice filled her ears, clear and professional. "Day 47 of neural mapping trials. Subject demonstrates remarkable adaptability to frequency modulation. However, I'm growing concerned about the military applications being discussed. This research was meant to help trauma victims, not create..." Static obscured several words. "Emotionless soldiers." Monroe's blood ran cold. She fast-forwarded through recordings, hearing Elise's growing alarm as she realized the true scope of Project Phoenix. The final recording made her stop breathing. "They're coming for my research. Commander Vaughn made it clear they'll take it by force if necessary. I've encrypted the core data and hidden it in the one place they'd never think to look, in Malik's neural pattern itself. If you're hearing this, Malik, baby, they've found you. I'm so sorry. The code in your wristband isn't just a key. It's a map. A map to where they're holding." The recording ended abruptly with the sound of breaking glass and shouting. "Monroe," Reeves called urgently, "you need to see this." He'd found another room, this one filled with filing cabinets specifically for test subjects. Most files were gone, but one folder remained, crammed behind a drawer. Inside was a child's photograph clipped to medical records. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. Across the folder in red stamp, "Deceased. Neural rejection." Malik appeared beside them, and his face crumpled. "That's Sarah. She was nice to me. She gave me her doll before." He couldn't finish. Monroe felt rage building inside her. These people had experimented on children, had killed them, and now they wanted Malik. "Come on," she said, her voice tight. "Let's keep moving." They descended to a sub-level, stairs creaking under their weight. The air grew colder, and Monroe noticed Malik's wristband had started glowing faintly again, responding to something in the environment. At the bottom of the stairs was a heavy door marked Test Chamber 3. Malik walked up to it, and before anyone could stop him, he pressed his wristband against the electronic lock. The lock clicked open. Inside, the room was like something from a science fiction movie. Cryogenic pods lined one wall, their displays dark but still connected to backup power. Experimental equipment filled the space. Brain scanners, neural imaging devices, monitors showing complex wave patterns. In the center of the room stood a terminal that powered on automatically as Malik entered. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly, Elise Carter appeared. Not live, but a holographic recording triggered by Malik's presence. "If you're seeing this, Malik," the hologram said, and Malik gasped, reaching toward his mother's image. "They've found you. I'm so sorry, baby. I tried to protect you. The wristband contains encrypted data about Project Phoenix. But it's more than that. I embedded safeguards in your neural patterns when you were younger. During those checkups I told you were for your health. The code in your wristband can only be accessed by your unique brainwave signature. Don't let them have it. Don't let them—" Suddenly, the lights throughout the facility blazed to life. Alarms began wailing. The terminal screen changed from Elise's message to a new display. "Perimeter breach detected. Security protocol activated." "It's a trap," Reeves said. "They knew we'd come here." Through the chamber's small window, Monroe saw movement in the hallway above. Men in tactical gear, dozens of them, flowing into the building like a dark tide. Then a voice echoed through speakers throughout the facility, calm and controlled. "Thank you for returning the asset, officers. We've been waiting." Monroe recognized the voice from background chatter in Elise's recordings. "Commander Vaughn." "We need another way out," Monroe said, scanning the chamber desperately. Malik pointed to a ventilation shaft in the corner. "That leads to the parking lot. Sarah and I used to hide there during drills." Reeves was already moving. He ripped the grate off and looked inside. It was tight, but they could make it. "Go," he ordered Malik and Monroe. "What about you?" Monroe asked. Reeves pulled out his weapon and checked the ammunition. "Someone needs to slow them down." "Daniel, no, we can all—" "Monroe, get him out of here." Reeves's eyes were fierce but resolved. "This is what I should have done years ago for my own kid. Let me do it for this one." Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Monroe grabbed Malik, lifting him into the shaft. He scrambled forward and she climbed in after him, turning back one last time to see Reeves taking position behind equipment, ready to hold off an army. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. "You're a good cop, Daniel," Monroe said. "You too, Tasha. Now go." She crawled forward into darkness as behind her, the first explosion rocked the chamber. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes lighting up the lab like lightning. Malik cried out, and Monroe pushed him forward, faster, faster, toward the dim light ahead. They emerged into the parking lot just as a second, larger explosion shook the building. Smoke poured from windows. Soldiers scattered, confused by the chaos inside. Monroe and Malik ran for the tree line, bullets kicking up dirt around their feet. They dove into the woods just as a massive explosion tore through the sublevel, sending a fireball erupting from the building's entrance. From the forest's edge, Malik turned back, tears streaming down his face. "He didn't make it out. He didn't—" "Don't look," Monroe said, pulling him deeper into the trees. "Don't look back." But even as they ran, Malik whispered, "He saved me. He saved me because Mom was right." Behind them, the facility burned. Inside, Commander Vaughn stood at a safe distance, watching the flames with cold calculation. His second-in-command approached. "Sir, we lost the target. Officers Monroe and the boy escaped through the sub-level ventilation. Officer Reeves is presumed dead in the explosion." Vaughn's jaw tightened slightly. "Presumed?" "We haven't recovered a body yet, but the blast radius—" "I want confirmation, and I want every available unit tracking that boy. He's been activated now. After being inside the facility, his neural patterns have been fully engaged. We can track him through atmospheric resonance." "Sir, the public attention will be contained," Vaughn interrupted. The boy is worth more than all of this. Continue the pursuit. As the sun set on the burning facility, Monroe and Malik pressed deeper into the wilderness. They'd gained information, but at a terrible cost. And now they knew. Elise Carter was alive. Somewhere. The question was where and how much time they had before Vaughn's forces caught them again. Malik clutched his wristband, feeling it pulse with warmth. Inside his mind, his mother's voice seemed to whisper, "Be brave, baby. Be brave." The hunt had truly begun. The explosion that had torn through the facility still echoed in Monroe's ears as she dragged Malik through the darkening forest. Smoke billowed behind them, and the boy kept looking back, searching for any sign of Reeves among the chaos. "Keep moving," Monroe urged, though her own heart felt like it was being crushed. Daniel Reeves had been more than a partner. He'd been a good man trying to redeem himself. And now he was gone. They ran until Malik's legs gave out. He collapsed against a fallen tree, gasping for breath, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his face. "He didn't have to do that," Malik sobbed. "He didn't have to die for me." Monroe knelt beside him, her own eyes burning. "Yes, he did. Because that's what good people do, Malik. They protect those who can't protect themselves. But I'm not worth it," Malik whispered. "I'm just a kid. Why do all these people keep getting hurt because of me?" Monroe grabbed his shoulders gently but firmly. "Listen to me. You didn't ask for any of this. Your mother tried to stop something evil, and they punished her for it. You're carrying something important, something that could save people. That makes you worth protecting. Do you understand?" Malik nodded shakily, wiping his eyes with dirty hands. They moved more carefully now, staying low, avoiding open ground. As night fell completely, Monroe heard something that made her freeze. Footsteps. Heavy, moving with purpose through the underbrush behind them. She pulled Malik behind a thick oak tree and drew her weapon, heart pounding. The footsteps grew closer. A figure emerged from the shadows, limping badly, clothes torn and burned. Daniel Reeves. Monroe nearly cried out, but caught herself. Reeves spotted them and raised a finger to his lips, signaling silence. He was injured, his left arm hanging at an awkward angle, burns covering the side of his face. But he was alive. "How?" Monroe whispered as he reached them. "Sub-level had an old water drainage system," Reeves said through gritted teeth. "I triggered the self-destruct on the upper level, then dropped down through a maintenance shaft. The water flow carried me out before the whole thing. Blue!" Malik threw his arms around Reeves's waist, careful of his injuries. The hardened cop softened completely, resting his good hand on the boy's head. "Thought I told you to keep running," Reeves said, attempting a smile that turned into a wince of pain. "We needed to rest," Monroe said, already examining his wounds. The burns looked bad, and his left shoulder was clearly dislocated. "We need to get you medical attention." "No hospitals," Reeves said immediately. "They'll be watching every emergency room within 100 miles. I'll manage." They found an abandoned hunting cabin 3 miles north, its windows broken and roof sagging but offering shelter. Monroe used supplies from a dusty first aid kit to clean Reeves's burns while he bit down on a piece of leather to keep from screaming. As dawn broke, casting pale light through the cabin's holes, Monroe finally had a chance to examine the flash drive Malik had been carrying. She pulled out her laptop, which she'd managed to grab from her car before abandoning it. "This is it," she said, plugging in the drive. "Let's see what your mother wanted us to find." The drive was encrypted, but when Malik pressed his wristband against the laptop's touchpad, files began unlocking automatically. Folders upon folders of documents appeared, video files, audio recordings, technical schematics. Monroe opened the first video file. Elise Carter appeared on screen, sitting in what looked like a home office, her face drawn with exhaustion and fear. "My name is Dr. Elise Carter," she began. "If you're watching this, it means I've been silenced. and my son Malik has reached someone who might be able to help. What I'm about to reveal is why they're hunting him. The video showed footage of laboratory experiments, brain scans, neural mapping sessions. Elise's narration explained how Project Phoenix had started as legitimate research into helping trauma victims process and overcome PTSD through targeted neural frequency modulation. But Commander Vaughn saw different applications. Elise continued, her voice bitter. He wanted to create soldiers who couldn't feel fear, couldn't question orders, couldn't empathize with targets. He wanted to weaponize the human conscience by removing it. More footage played, showing test subjects, including children hooked up to machines. Some looked peaceful. Others thrashed against restraints, eyes wide with terror. When I discovered the true purpose, Elise said, I tried to destroy the research. But Vaughn had already backed up everything to secure servers. So I did the only thing I could think of. I encrypted the override codes, the master key that could shut down the entire system, and I hid it in the one place they'd never look. The camera zoomed in on Elise's tear-stained face. I hid it in my son's neural pattern. Malik's brainwave signature is the only key that can unlock the failsafe I built into Project Phoenix. Without him, they can't fully activate the system. And, with him, they can access everything, including the ability to broadcast neural control frequencies to anyone who's ever been exposed to their initial trials. Monroe felt ice in her veins. How many people have been exposed? The video continued. They've been running small-scale trials for 2 years. Military personnel, prisoners, even some civilians who thought they were participating in sleep studies. Over 15,000 people have been exposed to the base frequency. If they activate Project Phoenix fully, they can control all of them simultaneously. Malik's voice was small. I'm the key to controlling thousands of people. No, baby, Elise's image said, as if answering him directly. You're the key to stopping them. The override code in your pattern will broadcast a counter frequency that breaks their control permanently. But they know this. That's why they want you. If they have you, they can extract the failsafe and remove it, making their system unstoppable. The video showed one final clip. Elise being dragged from her home by armed men while Malik, younger and terrified, watched from a hidden closet. Her last words before the camera cut out were, "Don't be afraid of what you are." Reeves, who'd been watching over Monroe's shoulder despite his pain, spoke quietly. We need to go public with this. Get it to every news outlet we can find. They'll claim it's fabricated, Monroe said, or suppress it before it spreads. We need something more. Malik touched his wristband, and it pulsed with blue light. Mom said if I ever needed to use the override, I'd know when the time was right. She said I'd feel it here. He pressed his small hand over his heart. Monroe knelt before him. Malik, I need you to be honest with me. When you made the electronics go haywire at the police station, could you control it? Malik shook his head. It just happens when I get really scared, like it's protecting me. That's your neural pattern responding to threat, Reeves said, his analytical mind working despite his injuries. Your mother programmed a defense mechanism into you that's incredible. It's also dangerous, Monroe added. If Vaughn's people can trigger that response and study it, they'll understand how to replicate it. As if summoned by his name, the distant sound of helicopters reached their ears. Monroe rushed to the window and saw 3 military choppers sweeping the forest in a grid pattern. They found us, she said. We need to move. Now. Reeves struggled to his feet. I'll slow you down. Leave me here. I can buy you time. We're not leaving you again, Malik said with surprising firmness. You're family now. Something in the boy's words hit Reeves hard. His eyes glistened as he nodded. All right then, family sticks together. They escaped through the back of the cabin just as the helicopters passed overhead. Moving through thick underbrush, they headed toward the main highway, where Monroe hoped they could blend into normal traffic. But Vaughn's forces were everywhere. Drones buzzed through the trees, and tactical teams moved on foot, tightening the net. Monroe realized with growing dread that they weren't trying to kill them. They were hurting them, pushing them toward something. "It's a trap," she said. "They're driving us somewhere specific." "Where?" Reeves asked. Malik's wristband suddenly glowed brighter, pulsing rapidly. The boy gasped, pressing his hand to his temple. "She's close. Mom's close. I can feel her." Monroe understood then. Vaughn wasn't just hunting them. He was using them as bait, knowing Elise would risk everything if her son was in danger. "We need to get to the city," Monroe decided. "Washington, D.C. If we're going public with this, we do it where the whole world can see." The skyline of Washington, D.C. rose before them like a steel and glass fortress. Monroe had managed to hotwire an abandoned pickup truck they'd found at a rural gas station, and they'd driven through the night, Reeves drifting in and out of consciousness in the back seat while Malik kept watch. Now, in the gray light of early morning, they entered the city, blending into rush-hour traffic. Monroe pulled her borrowed baseball cap lower, and Malik wore Reeves's oversized hoodie. Hood up, face hidden. "Where are we going?" Malik asked. "To see someone who owes me a favor," Monroe said. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a run-down apartment building in a neighborhood the tourists never saw. Monroe helped Reeves up 3 flights of stairs and knocked on door 3B. A woman's voice called through the door. "Who is it?" "It's Tasha Monroe. I need your help, Jayla." The door opened to reveal a black woman in her late 20s, dreadlocks pulled back, wearing an oversized sweatshirt and suspicious eyes. Those eyes widened when she saw Monroe's state, the injured cop, and the terrified child. "Jesus, Monroe, what did you get into?" "Something big. Can we come in?" Jayla's apartment was cramped but filled with computer equipment that would make any hacker jealous. Multiple monitors glowed with scrolling code, and hard drives hummed quietly in custom-built towers. "I heard you went rogue," Jayla said, closing the door behind them. "Every cop in the tri-state area is looking for you." "Not just cops," Monroe said. She explained quickly, showing Jayla the flash drive and playing portions of Elise's video testimony. Jayla's expression shifted from skepticism to horror as she watched. "This is real? They're really doing this?" "We need to decrypt the full files," Monroe said, "and we need to broadcast them everywhere, simultaneously, so they can't suppress the information." Jayla was already moving to her computers. "I can set up a distributed broadcast through multiple news outlets and social media platforms. If we hit them all at once, it'll spread too fast to contain." She looked at Malik. "And you're the key?" Malik nodded, holding up his wristband. "Okay," Jayla said, "all business now. Let me work on this. It'll take a few hours to set up the network and crack the deeper encryption. You 3 should rest. You look like death." While Jayla worked, Monroe tended to Reeves's wounds more thoroughly. The burns were infected, and his shoulder needed proper medical care, but he refused to let her take him to a hospital. "After this is over," he promised, "once the kid is safe." Malik had fallen asleep on Jayla's couch, exhausted beyond measure. Monroe watched him sleep, this small boy carrying the weight of thousands of lives in his neural patterns. 3 hours later, Jayla called them over. "I've got it. The files are fully decrypted. Monroe, this is worse than we thought. Project Phoenix isn't just about control. It's about complete behavioral modification. They can make people forget, make them believe things that never happened, turn empathy on and off like a switch." "How do we stop it?" Reeves asked. "The broadcast tower at the Department of Defense headquarters," Jayla explained, pulling up schematics on her screen. "That's where they run their secure communications network. If we can access their system and use it to broadcast the counter-frequency through Malik's pattern, along with all this evidence, we can shut down Project Phoenix permanently and expose everyone involved." That's a federal building, Monroe said. Security will be impossible. Not if we use your credentials, Jayla countered. You're still technically an officer. You can get into restricted areas they can't. Malik woke up, rubbing his eyes. Will this save my mom? The three adults exchanged glances. They had no idea where Elise was being held, or if she was even still alive. But they couldn't tell him that. First, we stop the project, Monroe said gently. Then we find your mom. As they finalized their plan, Jayla's computers suddenly went dark. Every screen, every device, all dying simultaneously. Then a single message appeared on the main monitor. We know where you are. Go, Jayla shouted. They've traced the connection. Go now. They were halfway down the stairs when the building's front entrance exploded inward. Tactical teams poured through, weapons raised. Monroe grabbed Malik and ran upward instead, toward the roof access. Behind them, they heard Jayla scream, then the sound of her being restrained. Reeves turned to fight, but Monroe pulled him forward. We can't save her if we're captured too. They burst onto the roof just as a helicopter appeared overhead, spotlight blinding. But Monroe had spotted a fire escape on the adjacent building. She practically threw Malik across the gap between roofs, then followed, with Reeves close behind despite his injuries. They descended the fire escape and emerged into an alley. Monroe still had the flash drive, but their window for action was closing fast. Every second they waited, Vaughn's net tightened. Sirens wailed throughout the city. Monroe realized with cold certainty that Malik's image must have been circulated to every police unit. Half the city's force was now hunting them. They stole through back alleys and side streets, moving toward the Department of Defense complex. It seemed impossible, suicidal even. But they had no choice. As they approached the security perimeter, Malik suddenly stopped walking. His eyes went unfocused, and his wristband blazed with blue light so bright Monroe had to shield her eyes. Mom, Malik whispered. She's here, in the city. She's underground. Beneath the old building, she's calling me. Malik, we need to focus on... Monroe began. No. Malik's voice was urgent. She's close. I can feel her stronger than ever. She's in danger. We have to help her first. Reeves and Monroe looked at each other. They'd come this far by trusting Malik's connection to his mother. And if Elise was alive and nearby, she might be able to help them access the broadcast tower. Which direction? Monroe asked. Malik pointed toward an older section of the city, where historical buildings mixed with newer construction. They moved quickly, following Malik's guidance as he seemed to sense his mother's presence like a compass pointing north. They reached a nondescript building marked for renovation, surrounded by construction barriers. Malik walked directly to a locked service entrance. Without hesitation, he pressed his wristband against the electronic lock. It clicked open. Your mother programmed you with access codes, Reeves realized. She was planning for this. They descended into darkness, finding stairs that led deep underground. The basement level opened into a tunnel system, old maintenance passages from decades past. Malik moved with confidence now, following a pull only he could feel. Finally, they reached a heavy door marked with faded government seals. And standing in front of it, as if he'd been waiting for them all along, was Commander Vaughn. He was tall, white, with silver hair and cold blue eyes. He wore a civilian suit, but everything about his posture screamed military, and he held a gun pointed directly at Malik. Thank you for bringing him, Vaughn said calmly. I knew the emotional connection would draw you here eventually. A mother's love, even broadcast through neural frequencies, is remarkably predictable. Monroe raised her weapon, but Vaughn's didn't waver. You shoot me, and my men shoot the boy. We have snipers positioned throughout this corridor. Red laser dots appeared on Malik's chest, confirming Vaughn's words. Let him go, Monroe said. "He's just a child." "He's so much more than that," Vaughn replied. "He's the final piece of something extraordinary. With his neural pattern, we can reshape human behavior on a global scale. Imagine a world without violence, without dissent, without the chaos of free will." "You mean a world of slaves," Reeves spat. "I mean a world of order," Vaughn corrected. Dr. Carter didn't understand the gift she created. She let sentiment blind her to the potential. Malik stepped forward, his small body shaking but his voice steady. "My mom understood exactly what you are, a monster who wants to steal people's choices." Vaughn smiled, and it was the coldest thing Monroe had ever seen. "Your mother is right behind this door. Would you like to see her before we begin the extraction?" He gestured, and one of his men unlocked the door. It swung open to reveal a small, sterile room. And there, strapped to a medical chair, was Elise Carter. She looked thin, exhausted, bruised from months of captivity. But when she saw Malik, her eyes filled with tears and fierce love. "Baby," she whispered. "My brave boy." Malik tried to run to her, but Vaughn grabbed his arm. Monroe lunged forward, but soldiers materialized from the shadows, grabbing her and Reeves, forcing them to their knees. "Now then," Vaughn said, dragging Malik toward the room. "Let's unlock those secrets your mother hid so carefully." Malik looked back at Monroe, terror and determination warring in his young face. His wristband pulsed steadily, and Monroe suddenly understood. This wasn't over. Malik had one more card to play. He just needed to get close enough to the source of Vaughn's power. As they forced him into the room with his mother, Malik whispered just loud enough for Monroe to hear. "The light always reveals the truth." The door slammed shut, and Vaughn turned to his captives with satisfaction. "You've lost, officers. You should have stayed in your precinct where you belonged." But Monroe saw something Vaughn didn't. Through the gap under the door, Malik's wristband was glowing brighter than ever before, and the lights throughout the underground facility were beginning to flicker. The real battle was just beginning. The extraction room was cold and clinical, filled with equipment that hummed with menacing purpose. Malik stood frozen as Vaughn's technicians strapped him into a chair surrounded by holographic displays. Screens flickered to life, showing intricate patterns of neural pathways, brainwave frequencies mapped in brilliant colors. Elise strained against her restraints across the room, her voice breaking. "Don't do this, Vaughn. He's just a child." "He's the culmination of your life's work," Vaughn replied, his voice almost reverent as he studied the displays. "And now finally we'll unlock what you so selfishly tried to hide." A technician approached Malik with a device designed to interface with his wristband. The man's hands shook slightly as he attached leads to the metallic band. Malik could feel his heart hammering, but he remembered his mother's words from the holographic message. "Don't be afraid of what you are. Beginning neural extraction," the technician announced, preparing to decode the encrypted override sequence. Machines whirred to life around Malik. He felt a strange pressure building in his head, like someone was pressing against his thoughts, trying to force their way inside. The screens showed his brain activity, spiking waves of color cascading across monitors, but something wasn't right. The technician frowned, tapping at his keyboard. "Sir, we're getting interference. The neural pattern it's not responding as expected." "What do you mean?" Vaughn demanded, stepping closer. "It's like there's a secondary layer of encryption. Every time we get close to the override code, the pattern shifts, becomes something else." Elise managed a weak smile through her exhaustion. "I told you, Vaughn, you can't just take it. The code isn't something that can be extracted. It has to be given freely." Vaughn's jaw clenched. "Then we'll encourage cooperation." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Bring the officers in." Moments later, Monroe and Reeves were dragged into the room at gunpoint, forced to their knees beside Elise's chair. Reeves' face was pale from pain, his injuries taking their toll, but his eyes were defiant. "Malik," Vaughn said, his voice taking on a false gentleness, "I'd hate for anything to happen to these people who've tried so hard to protect you. All you need to do is stop resisting, let us access the code, and they go free." "Don't listen to him, Malik," Monroe said immediately. "He's lying. He won't let any of us go." Vaughn backhanded her across the face. Malik cried out, surging against his restraints. "Leave her alone," the boy shouted, and as he did, every light in the facility surged with blinding intensity. Computers sparked, and the technician jumped back from his station as the equipment began to overload. "Fascinating," Vaughn said, seemingly unbothered by the electrical chaos. The emotional response triggers the neural frequency. Fear, anger, love, they're all catalysts for activation. In Malik's mind, he began to hear his mother's voice more clearly than ever before. But it wasn't a memory or an implanted message. It was something else. Something alive and present. "Baby, listen to me." Elise's voice came, both from across the room and from somewhere deeper, somewhere inside his own thoughts. "They can take your memories, but not your light. You are the light, Malik. You always have been." Malik's wristband grew warmer, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. The displays around him stopped showing just his neural patterns. They began showing something else, a frequency that seemed to resonate with every piece of electronic equipment in the room, in the building, maybe even beyond. "What's happening?" the technician asked, his voice rising in panic. "The system is uploading something. It's not extracting data, it's broadcasting." Vaughn's eyes widened. "Shut it down. Now." But it was too late. The failsafe that Elise had built into her son wasn't designed to be extracted. It was designed to activate under specific circumstances, when Malik was in mortal danger, when his emotional state reached a critical threshold, and when he was in proximity to the very system Vaughn had built to control others. The wristband's glow became almost blinding. Malik felt something release inside his mind, like a door he didn't know existed suddenly opening. Information flooded through him, not his own memories, but his mother's research, her final message, her desperate hope encoded in his neural pathways. Across the facility and beyond, every computer connected to Project Phoenix's network began receiving the same data stream. It flowed through military servers, government databases, and secure communications networks. And with it came Elise Carter's video testimony, the evidence of experiments on children, the proof of Vaughn's conspiracy. But more than that, it carried the override frequency, a neural pattern that would permanently break the control conditioning in everyone who'd been exposed to Project Phoenix. "No!" Vaughn screamed, lunging toward Malik. "Stop the broadcast." Monroe saw her chance. As Vaughn moved past her, she swept her leg out, catching him behind the knees. He stumbled, and Reeves, despite his injuries, threw himself at the nearest guard, knocking the man's weapon away. Chaos erupted. Guards rushed forward, but the facility's power grid was failing as Malik's broadcast overloaded every system. Lights exploded in showers of sparks. Computer monitors cracked and went dark. Emergency alarms began wailing. "Get the boy out!" Elise screamed to Monroe. "Get him out before the whole system crashes." A guard moved toward Malik, but the technician who'd been operating the equipment suddenly stepped in his way. "No," the technician said, his voice firm. "I signed up to help people, not torture children. I'm done." His defiance sparked something in the other technical staff. They stepped away from their stations, refusing Vaughn's orders. The commander's absolute control was fracturing, his people's consciences awakening as Malik's counter-frequency did exactly what Elise had designed it to do: restore human empathy and choice. Monroe reached Malik and began unfastening his restraints. The boy's eyes were unfocused, his body trembling as the massive data upload continued to flow through him. "Stay with me, sweetheart," Monroe said urgently. "Just a little longer." Vaughn had recovered his weapon and pointed it directly at Malik. "If I can't have the code, no one will." The shot never came. Reeves, moving with the last of his strength, tackled Vaughn from the side. They crashed into equipment, Vaughn's gun skittering across the floor. The two men struggled, Reeves fighting despite his wounded shoulder, driven by the promise he'd made to protect this child. "Monroe," Reeves shouted, "take him and run." Monroe swept Malik into her arms. He was light, too light, his small body limp with exhaustion. She ran for the door, but more guards blocked the exit. She skidded to a stop, trapped between them and the chaos behind her. Then Elise's voice cut through the madness. "Malik, baby, you have to finish it. Send the final sequence." Malik's head lifted from Monroe's shoulder. His eyes, though exhausted, held sudden clarity. He looked at his mother, memorizing her face, then reached out with his consciousness in a way he'd never done before. The wristband emitted one final, brilliant pulse of blue light that spread like a wave through the entire facility. Every person touched by Project Phoenix's initial conditioning, including the guards blocking Monroe's path, suddenly stopped. Their faces went blank for a heartbeat, then filled with confusion, then horror as they realized what they'd been part of. The lead guard lowered his weapon, looking at his hands like he didn't recognize them. "What? What have we been doing?" "Letting us leave," Monroe said firmly. "That's what you're doing now." The guards stepped aside. Monroe ran through the corridors, Malik clutched tight against her chest. Behind her, she could hear more fighting, more shouting, the sounds of Vaughn's operation falling apart as the truth spread like wildfire. They emerged into the tunnels and Monroe nearly collided with a figure rushing toward them. She raised her fist to strike, then stopped. It was Sergeant Miller. "Monroe," he said, breathing hard. "I've been tracking you since you left the precinct. Took me this long to find where they were holding everyone." He looked at Malik. "Is he okay?" "He needs medical attention," Monroe said. "Real medical attention." "There's an ambulance topside," Miller said, "and about 50 news crews. The broadcast went everywhere, every major network, every social media platform. The whole world just learned about Project Phoenix." As if to confirm his words, Monroe heard sirens approaching from every direction. Not just police, but federal agencies, military investigators, news helicopters. The story was too big to contain now. They climbed back up to street level, emerging into chaos of a different kind. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, federal agents in different uniforms than Vaughn's people were already securing the perimeter. A woman in a sharp suit pushed through the crowd, her credentials held high. "FBI Special Agent Winters, I need that boy placed in protective custody immediately." Monroe's arms tightened around Malik instinctively. "He's been through enough." "I understand," Agent Winters said, her voice gentler. "But he's the key witness to the largest government conspiracy in decades. We need to protect him properly." She paused, studying Monroe's protective stance. "You can stay with him. In fact, I'd prefer it. He clearly trusts you." As paramedics rushed forward with a stretcher, Malik's hand shot out and grabbed Monroe's sleeve. "Don't leave," he whispered. "Never," Monroe promised. "I'm right here." They loaded Malik into an ambulance, Monroe climbing in beside him. As the doors began to close, a commotion erupted nearby. Monroe looked out to see Reeves being carried on another stretcher, barely conscious but alive. His eyes found hers, and he managed a weak smile. Behind them, more figures emerged from the underground facility. Elise Carter, leaning heavily on 2 FBI agents, her legs barely supporting her after months of captivity. When she saw the ambulance, saw her son through the window, She broke free and stumbled toward them. "Malik!" she cried. The paramedics stopped loading the stretcher. Elise fell to her knees beside her son, her hands trembling as she touched his face like she couldn't believe he was real. "Mom," Malik whispered, tears streaming down his cheeks. "You were calling me. I heard you. I never stopped." Elise sobbed. "Every day, every moment I was calling to you. My brave, beautiful boy." They held each other as cameras captured the reunion, as the world watched a mother and son who'd fought an entire conspiracy just to be together again. 3 weeks later, the morning sun broke through the clouds over Washington, D.C., casting golden light across the city that had nearly become the epicenter of humanity's greatest loss of freedom. But instead, it had become the place where truth finally emerged from shadow. Monroe sat in a hospital room, watching Malik sleep. The boy had been through extensive medical evaluation, therapies to help him process the trauma, and countless interviews with investigators. But he was healing, both physically and emotionally. The dark circles under his eyes had faded, and he'd started eating properly again. The door opened quietly, and Reeves entered. His left arm was in a sling and burn scars marked his face, but he was alive and recovering. He'd been recommended for a commendation, though he'd told Monroe privately that he didn't want any awards. Protecting Malik had been reward enough. "How's he doing?" Reeves asked, settling into the chair beside Monroe. "Better," Monroe said. "He asked about you this morning. Wanted to know when you'd visit again." Reeves smiled, the expression still somewhat painful, with his healing burns. "Kid's got a good heart. After everything he went through, he still worries about everyone else." On the television mounted to the wall, a news anchor spoke in solemn tones. "Day 21 since the Project Phoenix revelations, and the fallout continues. Commander Marcus Vaughn has been arrested and faces charges including conspiracy, kidnapping, illegal human experimentation, and crimes against humanity. 7 other high-ranking officials have also been taken into custody." The screen showed footage of Vaughn being led into a federal courthouse in handcuffs, his face expressionless. Monroe felt a deep satisfaction watching him stripped of power, reduced to just another criminal facing justice. "The people he conditioned are recovering," Reeves said, gesturing to another news segment showing interviews with military personnel and civilians who'd been exposed to Project Phoenix's neural frequencies. "The doctors say the override sequence Malik broadcast permanently reversed the conditioning. They're calling it miraculous." "It was science," Monroe corrected. "Science and a mother's love. Elise Carter designed that failsafe to save people, not control them." The door opened again, and Elise herself entered, looking healthier than she had 3 weeks ago. She'd gained weight, the bruises had faded, and there was light back in her eyes. She was staying at a secure location, under FBI protection, but she visited Malik every day. "He's still sleeping?" Elise asked softly. "Like a rock," Monroe said, standing so Elise could take her chair beside her son. "He's safe now, Dr. Carter. Really safe." Elise reached out and brushed Malik's hair back from his forehead with infinite gentleness. "Because of you two. You risked everything for a child you barely knew." "We knew enough," Reeves said simply. "We knew he was worth saving." A knock at the door announced Agent Winters, who'd become a regular presence as the case developed. She carried a folder filled with documents. "I have news," she said. "The president just issued a formal statement. Project Phoenix is being completely dismantled. Every piece of equipment, every server, every bit of research is being destroyed under international oversight. And Dr. Carter, your name has been fully cleared. The scientific community is calling you a hero." Elise shook her head. "I'm not a hero. I'm a mother who made terrible mistakes and tried to fix them." "You're both," Winters said firmly. And the government is establishing new oversight committees for all neurological research. Your recommendations are being written into federal law. No one will be able to do what Vaughn tried to do ever again. Malik stirred, his eyes opening slowly. He blinked in the bright room, then smiled when he saw his mother beside him. "Morning, baby," Elise said, kissing his forehead. "Hi, Mom." He looked around at the others. "Officer Monroe, Officer Reeves, you're still here? Where else would we be?" Monroe asked, ruffling his hair gently. Over the following days, the city buzzed with activity. Congressional hearings were scheduled. Investigations spread across multiple agencies. The full scope of Project Phoenix's reach became clear. 15,347 people had been exposed to the conditioning frequencies. Thanks to Malik's broadcast, all of them were now free. Sergeant Miller visited one afternoon, bringing Monroe and Reeves their badges back. They'd been cleared of all wrongdoing, their actions deemed justified under extraordinary circumstances. "The department wants you back whenever you're ready," Miller said, "though I'd understand if you wanted to take some time." Monroe looked at Malik, who was drawing pictures at a small table the hospital had provided. "I think I need to make sure something first." A week later, formal ceremonies were held at the Capitol. Reeves and Monroe were presented with commendations for valor, awards they accepted while standing beside Malik and Elise. The boy wore his first suit, the wristband, still on his arm though its technological functions had been permanently disabled. He kept it as a reminder of his mother's love. Nothing more. During his speech, the president addressed Malik directly. "Young man, you've shown courage that most adults could never imagine. You've saved thousands of people, not just from control, but from losing what makes them human. Their ability to choose, to feel, to love. This nation owes you a debt we can never fully repay." Malik's response was captured by every camera in the room. "I just wanted to keep my mom's promise. She said we should always protect the light in people. That's all I did." The crowd erupted in applause. Monroe, standing just off stage, felt tears streaming down her face. Reeves stood beside her, his own eyes glistening. "That kid's going to change the world," Reeves said quietly. "He already has," Monroe replied. After the ceremony, Agent Winters approached Elise with paperwork. "Dr. Carter, you're free to go wherever you'd like. The protective custody is being lifted. You and Malik can go home." But Elise hesitated, looking at the document that would restore her old life. "I'm not sure where home is anymore. Our old house, everything we had. It's all tainted by what happened." "Then make a new home," Monroe said, surprising herself with the words. "Start fresh. Give Malik the childhood he deserves." "What about you?" Elise asked. "You and Officer Reeves, you're part of his story now, part of our family if you'll accept that." Monroe felt her throat tighten with emotion. In the chaos of the past weeks, she'd formed a bond with this child and his mother that went beyond duty. It was something deeper, something permanent. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that very much." 2 months later, Monroe received a package at the precinct. Inside was a small frame containing a child's drawing. It showed 5 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. The figures were labeled in careful handwriting: Mom, Malik, Officer Monroe, Officer Reeves, and Sergeant Miller. At the bottom, Malik had written, "My family who saved me. Love always." Monroe placed it on her desk where she could see it every day. The world moved on, as it always did. The news cycle shifted to other stories. But the changes that Malik and his mother had catalyzed rippled outward. Laws were passed protecting research subjects. Oversight committees gained real power. The 15,000 people freed from conditioning became advocates, telling their stories, ensuring nothing like Project Phoenix could happen again. On the 6-month anniversary of that rainy night when a small boy had begged to be arrested, Monroe and Reeves attended a memorial service. It was held at a restored laboratory, now converted into a research ethics center named after the children who died during Project Phoenix's early trials. A marble wall bore their names, including Sarah, the little girl whose doll Malik still kept. Elise gave a speech about remembering the lost while honoring their memory through action. Malik stood beside her, no longer just a victim, but a symbol of hope. After the ceremony, they visited the memorial wall together. Malik placed a single flower beneath Sarah's name. "Do you think she'd be proud?" he asked his mother quietly. "I think she'd be very proud," Elise said. "You made sure what happened to her never happens to anyone else." Monroe watched them, mother and son reunited, healing together. She thought about that stormy night, about the desperate child who'd understood that sometimes the only way to be safe was to run toward the very thing you feared. Malik had asked to be arrested because he'd needed protection, but in the end, he'd protected everyone else. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows through the memorial garden, Monroe's phone buzzed. It was a text from Malik, sent from his mother's phone. "Thank you for listening that night. Thank you for believing me. Love, Malik." Monroe typed back, "Thank you for being brave enough to ask for help. You saved us all." That evening, they gathered at Elise's new home, a small house in a quiet neighborhood where Malik could just be a kid. They'd started a tradition, Sunday dinners where Monroe, Reeves, and Miller would join the Carters for a meal. As they sat around the table, Malik asked Reeves about his son. "I'm seeing him more now," Reeves admitted. "After everything that happened, I realized life's too short to let pride keep you from the people you love. His mom and I are talking, working things out, maybe not as husband and wife, but as parents." "That's good," Malik said seriously. "Kids need their dads." "They do," Reeves agreed, reaching across to squeeze the boy's shoulder. "And sometimes they need people who aren't their dads too, people who'll fight for them no matter what." Later, as Monroe prepared to leave, Malik walked her to the door. "Officer Monroe," he said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Anything, sweetheart." "Do you think the light always wins, like my mom said?" Monroe crouched down to his level, looking into those wise, young eyes. "I think the light doesn't always win right away. Sometimes it gets covered up, hidden, almost extinguished. But people like you, people brave enough to keep shining no matter what, they make sure it never goes out completely. And eventually, always eventually, that light reveals the truth." Malik hugged her tightly. "I'm glad you found me that night." "Me too," Monroe whispered. "Me too." As she walked to her car, Monroe looked back at the house. Through the window, she could see Elise and Malik in the kitchen, washing dishes together, laughing about something. A mother and son doing normal, beautiful, everyday things. They'd tried to bury the truth beneath lies and power. They'd tried to erase empathy, to control humanity's choices, to dim the light that made people human. But they'd failed. Because sometimes all it takes is one small voice asking for help, and people brave enough to answer. Sometimes all it takes is a mother's love encoded in neural patterns, a child's courage, and officers willing to risk everything for what was right. The light they couldn't erase had been shining in a 10-year-old boy all along. And now, finally, Malik Carter could just be a child. Safe, loved, and free. The story had reached its end, but the light continued to shine. If a child came to you for protection, knowing it could destroy your entire life, would you have the courage to say yes? Like and subscribe for more stories that challenge what it means to be human.